Today we're going to touch a sensitive subject, which is the law of conversion. As we're all aware, in Judaism, it's not only monotheistic religion, but Judaism discourages, in general term, conversion. There is a process. We study it not only in the book of Ruth, but other sources of a process. But for sure, we're not proselytized or convinced by any means. The part of the subject is what exactly takes place at the process. We all know that after rejection 3 times, if the candidate is very sincere, etc., and we check the motive, we go to a period of study. At the very end, there is a process of going before bediני and ducking in a mikveh, in a ritual bath. So what do we do if we have a ger shemal velo taval, someone who's went to a process of brit milah, but did not complete it by ducking himself in a mikveh? So here we are on page 45, in the very bottom. Amar Rav Chama bar Guria, Amar Rav. We start with a subject which was more post-biblical time, the time that they have a Canaanite slaves. We don't have that today, but soon you see the application, as we said. When you take Eved Knani, a Canaanite servant, it has some to do with the Judaism, but not completion. So if Eved Knani wish to complete his process of conversion, הלוקח עבד מן העובד כוכבים וקדם וטבל בן חורין, קנה עצמו בן חורין. So, as we said, that part of the completion, it's not only, as we studied yesterday, ducking in a mikveh, but has to have the kavanah, the intent, leshem geirut, that the person should have in his mind that I'm about to duck myself in the mikveh in order to accept the change. Some rabbis say that it's not just that, but it's obligatory. That's part of the responsibility of the bediני. So if he does that, in the sense of completion, he is free. He's no longer a servant. Now, in that sense, you have here a concept that's called shi'abud chelki. It's not total because, again, the scenario is you're taking a servant from idolater. Mai ta'ama. What's the rationale? What's the logic behind that? 46, עובד כוכבים גופה לא קנה. Meaning, Rashi explains that, good morning, that the purchasing the quote-unquote the servant does not apply to the body, it applies solely to the service that come out of him. And Maide Kanela, the right that you have, it's over the labor that comes out of that a person, that slave, but not the Meir explained, but not himself, meaning in that sense, literally his body. Hu de maknele Yisrael. So the Meir explained later. We see it when you do it for the purpose of service, which is, again, that's just a side note. When it's come to kinyanim, come the law of acquiring, there are 2 different concepts. One is called kinyan mamon. Kinyan mamon, meaning that from that capability, you, meaning the owner, basically impose upon his servant to do the service he wish to. That's one. Another one, it's called kinyan isu, meaning that you have a special status. Canaanite servant is partially part of the nation of Israel, and more on that, it's not here, it's in the Tractate Kiddushin, page 16. וכיוון דקדם וטבל לשם בן חורין, אף כאלה שיעבודי, since he did it, meaning the slave proceeded and immersed himself for the sake of conversion to the status of a free man, אף כאלה שיעבודי, so he is considering a total Yisrael, and therefore Yisrael cannot be a Canaanite slave. So therefore the one who purchased him lost his ownership of that fellow. כי דרבא דאמר רבא הקדש חמץ ושיחור מפקיעים מידי שיעבוד. So Rashi said עשה שורו אפוטיקי והקדישו למזבח, meaning you take in ancient times the ox, nowadays you take a car, all right, and you dedicate that car to the altar, or nowadays you give it to a religious institution. So it's apotiki, or the same applies to a person's chametz, or a shichur, mean releasing a servant in order to pay a debt, and so therefore he cannot collect, the one who is debt collector cannot collect that from that. Why? Originally speaking, that servant belongs to the first one, and then when he release, so he's no longer owner. So Tosfot Yeshanim said that the moment the owner release it, he, meaning the servant, he's the owner of himself, as we said earlier, and therefore he have no zchut shi'abud, he has no right to do anything with that servant. But again, that's only Knaani and not Eved Ivri. מטיב רב חיסדא מעשה בבלוריה הגיורת שקדמו עבדיה וטבלו לפניה. So again, we're dealing here with the process and the law of conversion. So someone, she came with her servant. It's most probably a well-to-do individual. So before she completed the process, which is the immersion, ובא מעשה לפני חכמים ואמרו, קנו עצמם בני חורים. So what happened here, she came with her servant, they proceeded to do the tvila, and then the sages said by doing so they are no longer her servant. So lefanea ein, because they did it before, that's accepted. לאחריה לא, meaning if it was afterward, then the status was not. So it means that Canaanite servant is not koneh et atzmo, cannot go by himself, even he did it earlier, which is a contradiction to what we said earlier. אמר רבא לפניה בין בסתם בין במפורש. Again, as we said, the expression is important. לאחריה במפורש אין בסתם לא. So it means that it's not a contradiction, because if they specify in a very lucid, clear way that the intent for full conversion, they will indeed have gained their freedom thereby, but with an unspecified immersion, they will not have gained their freedom. Now we circumscribe that rule, we limited. אמר רב אביה, לא שנו אלו בלוקח מן העובד כוכבים. That applies solely if you take that servant from idolater. אבל עובד כוכבים גופי קני. But idolater himself, he can purchase even the next step, which is his own body. Soon you see the example. דכתיב וגם מבני התושבים הגרים עמכם מהם תקנו. So in Leviticus 25 said, also from among the children of the residents who live with you, from them you may acquire, which applies to those servants. אתם קונים מהם ולא הם קונים מכם ולא הם קונים זה מזה. So the question is, ולא הם קונים מכן למאי? אילי מה למעשה ידיו, עתו עובד כוכבים לא כאן לישראל למעשה ידיו, והכתיב או לעקר משפחת גר, ואמר מה משפחת גר זה עובד כוכבים, אלא לאו לגופי, כמה רחמנה אתם קונים מהם, afilu gufei. So basically you see here that it's, in very short, all this discussion applies to also to the body itself. Parich ravacha, ema bechaspa uvitvila. So maybe you said that it's applied to money and immersion for the sake of conversion to servitude. So on what basics do you assume to be acquired with only with money? So because if you said in the pasuk atem konim mehem, you purchase from them, so it means only we, but and it means both. But the moment that it's released, Ritva and Rashi said that changes, so it's a kasha. So it's a stay in a difficult state. Despite the unresolved difficulty, the halacha follow Rav Avia. That's the Yoreh De'ah 267. Amar Shmuel v'tzarich letokfo b'mayim. So Shmuel said, you have part of the intent. Rashi said, כשמטבילו לשם יהדות לעבדות, צריך שיתקפנו לתת עליו עול מלאכה במים. I'm reading the whole Rashi and then we just explain. כדי שיהיה נראית כטבילת עבדות, שאפילו יאמרו לשם בן חורין, לא קנה עצמו בן חורין ולא יהיה ממשות בדבריו. Rashi here is very strong. He speaks about the total intent to have him as a servant and nothing else. כי had דמינימין עבדי דרבשי, here is a story, באה לאט בולי, מסרני עליו לרבינו ולרביך ברד רבה, ואמר לו חזו דמינה יוחקה באיתלה. So, meaning, you see, if I be aware that I will deem compensation for him, for you, if you not prevent him from proceeding and declaring that he is immersing for the sake of full conversion of freedom. So it's like they used to do it in those days. Read American history, what happened with the slaves. That was, that's the way it was. Arpulei v'tzamtzumulei, arpulei ki echad lo le'evei וחליצה, which is, when they treated, it's almost like you take a dog with a, what is called that one, that you hold a dog?
Leash?
The leash. It's like the leash. And then in order to avoid וחליצה, they take it out. So the Yavets have three explanations, but just one of them is just the preparation that will not be any, they're not in danger. צמצמולי, כי איך דלא קדמים בלאמו לשם בן חורים אני תוביל, בעד דלה לרישה ממאיה, אנחו לאיזולתא דתינא עד הרישה, ואמרו לו זילמתי לבית מרח. So again, the key point is the תקיפה במים, that it was for different goal, different person. But again, it's a big discussion. The Avnei Nezer in Choshen Mishpat 72 elaborates on that, and here we ask a general question when acquiring servant. אמר לרב פאפא לרבא, חזה מר הנה דבר פאפא ברבא, דיה וזוזה לאין שלחגיו. So that time it was a taxes. They pay a par head. So he said, that's Gemarrah in Baba Metzia in 73, that said that in those days they have to give a taxes. So they give those taxes to the king, and it's like head tax. Umeshabdelu, and then they enslave those people. Kinafke, when they are free, tzricha geita de cheruta or lo. So they have to have a bill of emancipation or not. אמר לי איקו שכי ולא אמרו לכו להמילך. הכי אמר רב ששת מוהר קייהו דהנה בתפסה דמלכה מנח. So that seal, the seal of bondage of these people lies in the king chest, because that's the idea of Dina de Malchuta, that you are part of written text. Nowadays you have it in a computer, right? That you, the moment the king sell it, so that's Dina de Malchuta. So even the king is not Jewish, here it's different. Either the Ramban said that people accepted the yoke, the burden of his kingdom, so therefore we take it that way, or the same treated as a war, that ומלכה אמר מאן דלא יאיב קרגה משתעבד למאן דאיב קרגה. So the king said, if you don't pay taxes, So you are basically a servant or slave to those who pay. So therefore, when you release them, you need to have the bill of emancipation. Rav Chia Bar Abba Ikla Legavla. Now we back to a discussion of idolater that prohibited. Chazab not Israel de me'abran megerin shamalu velo tavlu. He noticed over ladies that that were pregnant from people that basically have the Brit Milah but did not did the Tvila l'shem Geirut. V'chaza chamra the Israel the mazgi of the Kochavim v'shatu Israel, that's the issue of Yain Nesech. V'chazat turmusim v'shalke of the Kochavim v'achlu Israel, that's bishul akum. ולא אמר לו ולא מידי, he didn't say anything. עתה לקמי רבי יוחנן אמר לצבע אחרי זה בניהם שהם ממזרים, ועל אינן משום יין נסר, ועל תורמוסן משום בשולי עבדי כוכבים, לפי שאינן בני תורה. So in general, he declared here that everything is not right. The children, it's mamzerim, the wine is yain nesech, libation wine, and turmusan, it's the food is cooked by idolater. Why? Because they are not bnei Torah. So that's the Rashi said that the Tormosin is part of that. Anyway, al bneihem shel mamzerim, now we elaborate. Rabbi Yochanan לתלמיד אמר רבי יחיא בר אבא אמר רבי יוחנן לעולם אין גר עד שימול ויטבול וכיוון דלא תביא לו עובד כוכבים. That's very important. Rabbi Yochanan hold that the process of conversion has to be milah, brit milah, and tvila, and the tvila, the dak himself, has to be l'shem geirut, for the purpose of conversion. So as long as it's not completed, it's still under the category of idolater. Rabbi Yochanan, as we study in page 44, עובד כוכבים ועבד הבא בישראל עוולת ממזר. So therefore, that's the reason of the declaration. ועל ינם משום יין נסך, משום לך לך אמרין הנזירה, סחור סחור לך ומלותי קרב. So it means someone who became Nazirite. So one of the goal of Nazirite is someone who's AA, right, who's attached to alcohol, who's dangerous when he's involved with any form of alcohol. And therefore, what do? You put another fence around, and by doing so, it's like when a Nazirite, he used a euphemism. You have a Nazirite that comes around a place that it's a vineyard, you tell him go around, circumnavigate that area, don't go there, because if you go there, you may fall to that trap. It's like I saw lately with the wedding of my daughter. So it was a friend of the family who was recovered alcoholics. So at the end of the chuppah, the rabbis, they use a huge cup, and they give the chassan, the kala, and everyone. And then that fellow, somebody from their side, innocently, while I was talking to someone right after the chuppah, brought the cup. And I don't know if it was because I was there or the person really recovered. I hope he really recovered. But he said, I can't touch one. The guy said, no, but it's a big mitzvah, it's good. It's a touch. He says, I can't touch even a little bit. Anyway, ve'al turmusan.
It's not easy.
Right. No, so then, when we had the Seuda, that person told me that in his program, what is called AA or something?
Right.
So in his program, he needs to report any incident that even he was approached to drink. Even he didn't drink, but he have to report that incident to the whatever he go for rehabilitation.
Yeah, mentor or the
whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sponsor, that's what they call it.
Sponsor.
Yeah,
Okay,
they have to report those things. So.
ואל תורמוסן משום בישולי עובדי כוכבים לפי שאינן בני תורה. הבני תורה שערי. So you mean to say that בני תורה allowed to eat בישולי עכו"ם? ואמר רב שמואל ורבי יצחק משמי דרב, כל הנאכל כמות שהוא חי, אין בו משום בישולי עובדי כוכבים. So it means raw food. והתורמוס אינו נאכל כמות שהוא חי, ויש בו משום בישולי עובדת כוכבים. אז גמרא סדר רבי יוחנן כאידך לישנא סבירא לידא, אמר רב שמואל בר רב יצחק בשמי דרב, מורנינג, כל שאין עולה על שולחן מלכים לאכול בו את הפחד משום עובדי כוכבים, בתמה דינם בני תורה, בני תורה שרי. So in general, I knew that recently the chief rabbinate of Israel tried to do it hard, but one of the things that the Rabbonim who come to a diaspora from Israel, they basically need the extra training with this subject of Bishulei Akum, because it's a very common and it's a subject in Halacha that not every place put a big emphasis on that, but it's a lot to discuss. And there are books out there that go into details. So meaning, Tosfot is a famous Tosfot in Tractate Yevamot page 6, that there are certain areas we should accept some stringencies, especially when it's come to this subject. Anyway.
This regards then Mavushal wine. Mavushal?
Not just Mavushal wine, even Bishulei Akum in general.
So any food?
Any food that was cooked by adulterer in general terms, it's an issue. Right? We have to, one of the reasons you see sometimes the Rabbonim that comes from the Star K, etc., make sure that at least the beginning of cooking, the beginning of process, were made by someone from our shul, to make sure that the process of cooking made with no matter of bishulei akum.
Is it sufficient to have a...
Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, by the way, said that it's enough that she's turning the oven.
That's exactly what I was asking. So it's sufficient to turn on the stove or oven.
The other Rabbonim said that it should be the central piece. In other words, if you bring, it's not the subject for the day, if you bring a chef, professional chef, to do a fancy whatever event, wedding, whatever it is, and he's the main cook, still you need to have someone from us to do the beginning and, according to Simon, do the main process of cooking. In other words, he can be a good instructor. Tanu Rabbanan, ger shemal velo taval. Now we're doing, in some ways, getting close to practical halachot, because this is one of those sensitive subjects. We said that the process of conversion has to be the sincere intent, which back and forth 3 times. Then we have to have, if it's a male, he needs to have the brit, or soon you see the controversial issue of hatafat dam, which means there are people who are born circumcised, and therefore there is a process of taking a small drop of blood, and then you have the tvilah, the final immersion in a mikveh. So they ask a question: what happened if someone have the brit milah, and not just the brit milah, but also did it for the purpose of geirut, but he did not complete it, did not duck himself in a mikveh? Rabbi Eliezer Omer harei ze ger. Rabbi Eliezer said, I am accepting him as a conversion. The conversion is valid. Why? The source is very interesting source. He said, שכן מצינו באבותינו שמלו ולא טבלו. Rashi tells us here, בימי משה, the time of Moses, כשיצאו ממצרים, when they left Egypt, ויצאו מכלל בני נוח, they are no longer under the category only of the descendants of Noach, לקבל התורה ולקבל פני השכינה. So to accepted the yoke of the Torah and the divine providence, which means they said in the book of Yehoshua chapter 5, כי מולים היו כל העם היוצאים ממצרים. They use the word yotzim, which means that this is the Brit Milah when they left. The same applies another source in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 16. We said it every Passover say, ואעבור עלייך, that's apply of יציאת מצרים, ואראך מתבוססת בדמייך, דמייך is in a plural. The rabbis derive from that 2 form of blood, which one is the Paschal lamb, and the one is the Brit Milah, and then that's part of what happened when they left the Egypt. Meaning, since the Torah said, V'chol areh lo yochal bo, someone who's not circumcised cannot eat the Korban Pesach, so therefore, that's the source. But, according to Rabbi Eliezer, since we don't have a source that they duck themselves in the mikveh before receiving the Torah, he derived from that Tvila eina me'akevet, that the fact that he's not duck himself, b'di'avad, it's not a reason not to accept that person. Aruch Laner elaborates, but let's continue. Taval shebalu velo tavlu, and he said taval velo mal, but if we go the other way around, if the ger did the tvila but not the brit milah, Rabbi Yoshua Omer harei ze ger, he said he has the acceptance of geirut because he duck himself taval leshem geirut, for the purpose of conversion. Sheken matzinu be'imachot, we have a source by our foremothers when they left Egypt, shetavlu velo malu, that they duck themselves, which is the women, they are no longer the descendants of Noah, because they, the moment they like the man, the women who left Egypt also underwent conversion. So because for them it was affected by immersion, obviously without brit, we see that immersion is the critical act of conversion. Now, how the woman left Egypt and immersed themselves, soon we see it in the Gemarrah. והחכמים אומרים, טבל ולא מל, מל ולא טבל, אין גר עד שימול ויטבול. The sages said that, and for sure you have to remember that that's lechatchila, meaning the way that we wish to, that if you do not have the completion of both, it's not accepted. Meaning, if he duck and he doesn't have the brit, or the brit and not the duck himself, it's not sufficient. You have to do both. ורבי יהושע נמי נילף מאבות. How about the other sage? That how about study or learning from the story of the ancestors, that they duck themselves but did not do the tvila? And you may say that the tvila, the duck himself, it's not the reason. Rabbi Eliezer nami neilaf me'imahot. And how about Rabbi Eliezer? He also derived the law from the foremothers. So again, that's the question. So we said v'chiteima. If you tell me, that's the answer for the second question. According to Rabbi Eliezer, ein danim efshar me she'i efshar. So we do not derive a possibility, we cannot derive the law regarding brit for men, which is a physical possibility, from the law regarding the women, which is a physical impossibility. והתניא רבי אליעזר אומר, מפני לפסח דורות שאין בא אליו מן החולין. Now we try to juxtapose the concept of Paschal lamb, that it's in a future generation. So again, you have a fellow that have money of Maaser Sheni, which is the second type we explained many times, but the person needs to carry that to Yerushalayim and substitute that and by other form of offering, but he cannot do that for the Pesach, so he cannot do the Korban Pesach without Ne'emar Pesach b'Mitzrayim, which is V'ne'emar Pesach b'Dorot. They still not inherited the Eretz Israel, so they still do not have the concept of Maaser Sheni. It's not yet in effect that law. Ma Pesach amur b'Mitzrayim en ba ela min hachulin. So you cannot use the money for the second tithe in order to purchase the Paschal lamb. Of Pesach amur ledorot, we have concept of Pesach, the offering at the time of Egypt, and a Pesach in the future. So that future ein ba ela milachulin, has to be the unconsecrated money. אמר לו רבי עקיבא וכי אפשר, דנים אפשר מאי אפשר, the same concept, אמר לו, אבל פי שאי אפשר, ראיה גדולה היא ונלמד הימנה. he said it's a great proof, and we can derive from that. Why? Because the Ritva said that that's a good example for all the others. How? Since the paragon, the example, the first one was a Pesach Mitzrayim, which led to, in a way, copy or doing, following the same as the future Paschal Lamb. So therefore, you derive that concept from the original. So the same way, the idea of conversion. Since our ancestors, when they left Egypt, that was the original quote-unquote conversion, which became a paragon, a best example of future conversion. So therefore, you derive that concept. The Tosfot, the Dibur Matchil Amar, dealing here with how exactly you learn it. You learn it by Binyan Av, by Gzerah Shava, by Hekesh. Again, it's not for our discussion. Ela 46 betaval velomal kule alma lo pligi de mehani, meaning both Rabbi Eliezer and Yoshua agreed that this geirut, this process of conversion, is accepted because both learned from the foremothers that they dak but did not have the Brit Milah. Ki pligi bemal velo taval. If someone had the Brit Milah but not have the mikveh, Rabbi Eliezer Elif Me'avot, that they did it without Tvilah as far as we have a record, without Tvilah, Rabbi Yoshua Be'avot Named Tvilah, he hold that they do, meaning that Rabbi Eliezer learned from the foremother, and Rabbi Yoshua learned also from the foremother. But you see here, according to majority of the sages that hold that you need both Brit and the Tvilah, so they hold that the forefather did both. But the Ramban in Tractate Shabbat 135 said that that's the concept of En Danim Efshar Mishei Efshar. Anyway, Menali, how do you know it? That's the eve of Matan Torah, that God said to Moses, go to people and tell them to sanctify themselves before they see the divine providence in receiving their time of revelation Sinai, which is Exodus 19. So Rabbi Yeshua derived from that, which is when it's come to Baal Keri, someone who has a discharge. So the Torah said in Leviticus 15, ורחץ במים את כל בשרות. He doesn't say וחיבס, which means he doesn't need to duck his clothing, he needs to duck himself. מקום שטעון כיבוס נודין שטעון טבילה. So they said ודילמה נקיות בעלמא, maybe for the sake, just for the purpose of cleanness. So that's the idea that the laundry their clothing for the purpose of cleanness, to receive the time they're receiving their revelation, and here for the purpose of purity. So it's not proof. אלא מאחר. ויקח משה לדם ויזרוק על העם. Said in Exodus 24, Moses took the blood of the korbanot, of the offering, and he did the haza'ah. He sprinkled on the people. וגמילה דאין הזעה בלא טבילה. We learn that in order to, Tosfot said, to receive that sprinkling, they need to have first the act of Tvilah. So Tosfot here try to elaborate, to tell us how exactly, what type of Tvilah we are speaking here. Because it's a contradiction between the Mishnayot. One said it's before and one said after the Haza'ah. So there are some Rishonim, some early sages that said, Meherai bane Beit HaMikdash, soon the temple, Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt, so you have all these Geirim, they need to have Haza'ah. Why? Because it was Tvilah, right? Excluding the Brit Milah, because if you tell me, Kol Makom Sheyesh Haza'ah, Tvilah, so therefore you require that from them. So he said, Rabbi Yoshua Tvilah b'imaot menalan. How do you know that Rabbi Yoshua required the Tvila, the immersion in the case of the foremother. So Tosfot, דיבור המתחיל ורבי יהושע, ask a question. Number one, who said that they did the sprinkling haza'ah on the women? Or according to Rabbi Eliezer that said that it wasn't Tvila, so how they knew about the women? So anyway, he said, so the Gemara said Svarahi. So they said it's a logical argument. How they really accepted under the wing of the divine providence? What exactly involved in that process? We study in the book of Ruth, chapter 2, verse 11, that they need to have some act. You see there when Naomi was talking to Ruth, so she said that you now accepted under the divine providence, under the wing of the divine providence. In my book, Ruth Talk, I elaborate on that concept, what exactly involved here, that it's called you've been accepted under the divine providence. Anyway, אמר רבי חייא בר אבא, אמר רבי יוחנן, לעולם אינו גר עד שימול ויטבול. You need to have both, right? פשיטה, יחיד ורבים הלכה כרבים. We said it many times. Almost the invention of democracy, right? You're taking a vote and you go by the majority. One single against many, you go by the many. So therefore, you go by the majority. So he said here it's not apply. Why? Man chachamim, who are those sages that we mentioned, is Rabbi Yossi. Ditanya. Harei sheba ve'amar malti velo tavalti. So someone said, I did a Brit Milah for the purpose of Geirut, but he doesn't have a witnesses that he dug himself for the purpose of Geirut, matbilim oto. So the Bet Din can do adbala, u'ma bekach. Why it's not, so what's the problem if you have just one, just the Brit Milah and not Tvila? דברי רבי יהודה, רבי יוסי אומר, אין מדבילים. As we said, Rabbi Yossi hold, in order to have an effect, you need to have both. You need to have both, meaning Brit Milah and Tvila, for the purpose of Geirut. So even we see that he is already circumcised. For example, you have in the ancient Gibeonite, you have some of the royal family in England, you have an Arab. Right? There are those nations that have the Brit Milah for the baby boys. So therefore, or the Meiri said maybe he was born circumcised. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yossi, you have to have which we call dam hatafat dam. Hatafat dam in very short, according to Sfot and others, you take like a small tiny a needle, and you have out a little type of miniature, a little bit blood. So that's the purpose of Geirut. Lefichach, and consequently, since either circumcision or immersion is effective, matbilim ger b'Shabbat, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. We have in Shabbat a concept we study, it's called tikkun mana. You're changing the status. But here, it's not an issue. Rabbi Yossi omer ein madbilim. Why? Because it's already have the Brit Milah, but since the completion you need to have both, meaning the act of Tvila, of Dak himself, that's the completion of the process, and since you do that, it's tikkun mane, which means Tosfot said, he asked a question, how about Tvila mitum'ah? A person is impure, he's ducking himself on Shabbat. You see a story about Hasidim HaKadmonim, the ancient pious people, that it was Shabbat at the time of the Onah, so on Yom Shishi they used to do it. Also, Hadbalat Kelim, Lichora, you can do it, because it's called Nir'ekim Taken Manai. It's appear like you are fixing something, you change the status. But the whole concept, according to this Tosfot, is like chashash, you concerned that people are not educated, misconstrue the whole idea. Marmar lefichach madbilim ger b'Shabbat. Therefore, you can immerse on Shabbat a convert who had previously have the brit in our presence. So they said, Pshita, that's obvious. Kevan Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'chad hasagya, since Rabbi Yehuda said it's enough one of them, either milah or tvila, heicha dema lefanenu madbilim, mai lefichach. What's the chidush? Every fellow Jew can do tvila on Shabbat. Ma'u detema, Rabbi Yehuda tvila ikar, וטבילה בשבת לא דקה מתקן גברא כמשמע דרבי יהודה או הבה. So it means that according to Rabbi Yehuda, he can have either one, require either this or that, which means either Brit Milah or immersion. So it means, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that if he comes during the regular day in the week and he wants to complete the conversion, and he said that I have already circumcised, you can do the immersion, even if it's not clear to us if the Brit Milah was for the purpose of Geirut. But as we said, not everyone follow that. There are those who require Eidim, etc. Rabbi Yossi אומר אין מדבילים. פשיטא דכיוון דאמר רבי יוסי תרתי באינן תקוני גברא בשבת לא מתקנינן. We don't do תיקון מנה. אמר דתימה ורבי יוסי מילה עיקר, ואת אמרו דלא הווי מילה בפנינו. According to Rabbi Yossi, the centerpiece is the Brit Milah, and since we don't have Eidim, that he did the Brit, so maybe, or even he did the Brit, I meant to say for the purpose of the mitzvah, אבל איך דאבי המילה בפנינו ולטבול זה בשבתא. So because if you tell me that the עיקר, the essence is the Brit Milah, so the ducking, it's not considered תיקון כמש מלן רבי יוסי תרתי באי, which means both Brit Milah and the Tvilah. So I wanted to know, so a side note, it's not part of our discussion today, but according to the Rishonim, it's a big disputation. There are basically four views in this. Because according to Rabbi Yossi, if a baby was born already circumcised, so you basically, you need just atafat dam, just a little. Now, if you have, in that sense, a non-Jew that was born circumcised, or they did it as a part of the governmental health law that they do in some countries. So, for all kind of health reasons. So, what do? You do the Tvilah and atafat dam, right? Not everyone goes along with it. There is Rabbeinu Hananel. Again, it's one view. He said, only from a fellow Jew you can do the completion of this process. But here, his son can be full term of Jewishness. But he call him Yehudi Chaser, which missing something. Why? Because, as we said, the original Brit Milah was a question. Even it was done, it's a question, it wasn't for the purpose of being part of the covenant. So Rabbeinu Hananel have an issue with that. What's the application? The big question is, what happened if Baal Bat Israel? So Zonah we not call her, but when it's come to Korban Pesach, we said, V'chol harei lo yochal bo. So therefore, it's the very Machloket Yesodit is a very serious disputation among both Rishonim and Achronim how you treat it. Because the key problem is when you use the term Rabbi Yossi Omer En Madbilim. Rabbi Yossi said, don't bother to, you don't have to duck himself in the mikveh. Why? What's the problem? You mean to say, one school of thought, Lo zakuk le'adbilo, you don't need to bother with ducking himself because it doesn't make any difference, one school of thought. Or you tell me because he needs also hatafat dam, or it's another view that he cannot do hatafat dam, and therefore you cannot do, why you cannot do hatafat dam? Because he was already mahul. But since you cannot making a complete, quote unquote, only his future generation, according to this Rabbeinu Hananel, therefore you don't do hatbala. Again, it's just a side note. אמר רבא עובדא בי הווה בי רבי חייא ברבי, ורב יוסף מתנה רבי יושע ברבי, ורב ספרא מתנה רבי יושע ברבי חייא דעתא לקמי. So I explained in my book, ביאורי הכלומר ברש"י על הש"ס. Rashi said here, כלומר רבי יושע נמי הווה בעד רבי חייא. So in very short, follow this Rashi and follow Tosfot. The beauty of this is the mention of all of them. It's because the need to have three. The source of the need of three. דעתא לקמי גר שמל ולא טבל, אמר לי שהה כאן עד למחר ונטבילך. Wait until tomorrow and then we do. שמע מן התלת. Very important. Listen to this. Three things we learn. Number one, שמע מן הגר צריך שלושה. So from this Rav Safra statement about the episode, that the convert requires his conversion a present of three. Number two, ושמע מן אינו גר עד שימול ויטבול. That the completion, he needs to do both, ברית מילה and immerse himself. ושמע מינה אין מטבילים גר בלילה. The third one, you don't do it at night. So therefore he told him to wait until the next day. So the Gemara asked, ונאמר שמע מינה באינן מומחין. So how about you derive from all these names of sages that you need to have an expert present. So they said, Dilma de'ik alu, maybe it happens that they just happen to be available. So by law, however, even laymen suffice. So that's the idea that we have the number three. Tosfot dealing with the reason, but anyway, we don't have time. So אמר רבי חייא ברבא אמר רבי יוחנן, גר צריך שלושה. It's important, you need to have the present of three men. Why? משפט כתיבי. The Torah said, משפט אחד יהיה לכם כגר כאזרח. They said in book of במדבר, book of Numbers, chapter 15, and therefore, in order to have it, you need to have three. משפט, court case, you need to have, by the biblical term, three. That's the present. You have for sure a formulation of different court session of different amount, but the basic are three. So if you remember yesterday we studied a little bit. There is a Tosfot on page 45b, the very bottom Tosfot, 3 lines from the bottom of the page. It's a big discussion in that Tosfot, what happened in the final stage of the process, what exactly you need in order to complete. So the very bottom of 45b is a notion, again, not lechatchila, b'diavad, if it's accepted. And basically that notion of Tosfot, it's speak about difference between Kabbalat all mitzvot, which is the essence, versus the idea of the Hadbala itself. But we will discuss further on that tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem. Matai nechshav ger, when one is considered a convert. So this is the Rambam, Sefer Kedusha Ilchot Isurei Bi'ah, chapter 13. One is considered to be a convert only when he has both the Brit Milah and immersed in a mikveh and ritual bath. That's basically Rabbi Yochanan. Now, one is considered, Rambam continue, and it's also Shulchan Aruch Yoreh De'ah 268. One is considered to be a convert only after he accepts upon himself the yoke of mitzvot, undergoes the circumcision, and immerses in a ritual bath. This act must be performed before 3 individuals suitable for sitting in judgment and must be done during the day. B'diavad, after the fact, if one immerses at night, the conversion is still valid, but as we said, the centerpiece is Kabbalat all mitzvot, accepting of the yoke of Torah and mitzvot.
Boyachem leshuloim malachai yeshuloim malachai